Hello there, this is JoAnn Chambers. I want to thank you for taking some time today to learn how to engage more deeply with our soundscapes. This is really a great place for beginners who are not familiar with our work. We've been doing this work for the last 36 years, so there's many who have kind of followed along with the journey, and of course those that are stepping in right now. So wherever you are on your journey of connecting with us, this is a good place to start, just to kind of give you some foundational information about how they were created and how they can be used for optimal effectiveness. And I have worked for the last 36 years with thousands of clients all over the world, mostly remotely because we really started communicating with the global community around 2000. And so we have a lot of history of working with clients who were just starting, people who were just either starting their awakening process or had been on it for a while and were looking for certain tools to use that would help facilitate the process, accelerate it or stabilize it, or just help them work through the various stages of the work. So what I want to do with these intros here is to just, as I said, educate you about our journey in creating the music and what we've learned, and sort of take you through some initial steps. Once you get through some of these initial steps, then of course you're on your own to explore however you want to. So I think the place to start is really with an understanding of Gary and his mission and how he developed it through the years. In this particular video, I'm going to be a little bit brief because there's a lot to it and I don't want to overwhelm you, so I'm going to try to really just touch on the highlights to get you through this first phase of things. I will be sharing more in-depth info and more expanded info in a new podcast that I'm going to create called the Twin Flame Journeys podcast. And I hope to start that pretty soon. This recording date is May 4th, 2024, just to give you an idea for whenever you step into the work when this was recorded. Now, if you want to learn more in-depth information now, we do have a document that we created many years ago that kind of gives both of our backgrounds and will give you a lot more history than what I'm going to share here. So I really want you to feel free to post any questions or comments that will help me to continue to share this knowledge and information with you based on your questions and your experiences, so that I can kind of stay up with what people are really wanting to learn and hear about from us. As we started unfolding our life's work together, we went through our past in this life, trying to bring together the breadcrumbs, so to speak, that made sense as to why we came together and what we were supposed to do in our life. So Gary started actually at the age of 5. Piano appeared in his life and he just started playing. He just got on there and started playing, and he didn't have any training, and he chose never to have any training because he felt that he had already done that in many past lives, and for him in this life it would have interfered with his receiving the transmissions as he did. So at the age of 5, he actually started bringing music through that was like at a prodigy level. And so he continued that process. He discovered his connection to the other realms, the higher realms of sound, which was where he felt the most peaceful and balanced. And so he was definitely pulling through past life awareness. So as he played the piano, these sounds from the other realms were accompanying him, and he was like hearing a whole orchestra while he was playing. So building his clairaudient abilities at that time, he didn't know that's what he was doing, but that's definitely what he realized he was doing as he got older. So it was like a form of communication and a communion for him. This is where he connected to God, and even though he grew up in a Christian background, he knew that God was much more than what the church was teaching him, so he definitely had a lot of trouble in those areas trying to connect with a family that was more religious than spiritual. So this journey of traveling within and connecting with source vibration guided him into many different realms, both of light and of the dark, just for travels and exploration, taking him into deeper, more expansive explorations and communications with these other realms, these other dimensional realms, which many people are now starting to be more accepting of these concepts, and this knowledge is coming out more and more now. So as he matured and progressed in his off-world trainings, he found knowledge and understanding was really easy for him. So he actually excelled in academics as well. As long as he was interested in the topic, he was able to draw knowledge and information from the higher realms, so he didn't have to go through some of the struggles of book learning and academic learning that was being taught. So school was difficult for him in the sense of how they taught things, but he was able to seem and appear like he wasn't paying attention, yet he was still could maintain an A student level because of the connections he had to the other realms, and the teachings he was getting from them was really coming through sound and not so much through the words. He was able to translate all of that into vibrational frequency content that was able to help him understand and learn. So he had a very high IQ level, and he was an avid reader as well. He would consume books because he spent a lot of time alone. As you might imagine, he wouldn't be a so-called normal child, and it was difficult to find friends, of course, but he loved to read and he loved to go within, and that's how he spent a lot of his childhood. So he looked at everything from the sciences to magic and fantasy, but he really loved sci-fi. He felt that actually the sci-fi information held more truth than a lot of the academic books, so he was able to sort of extract out from those sci-fi books and comics and things like that the actual truth and the actual knowledge that was coming through many of those authors at that time. And of course he loved the TV shows and movies that were all related to that. One of his big awakening movies would have been Close Encounters, of course, of the Third Kind, which a lot of us woke up a lot with that particular one. But if you remember that one, the punchline in the end was that the communications was done through sound. One of the things he really enjoyed doing was looking through a microscope and diving deep down into the cellular level of things. So he was fascinated by that. He would go out in nature and bring things home and put it in his microscope. And then the opposite of that, he would love the telescope where he could look out into space. So if you think about that, he was expanding his frequency spectrum, his realms of connection from so many levels, from deep within to connecting to spirit realms on the other side, to coming through into 3D, and then moving into things like the microscope and the telescopes and expanding both of those directions as well. So if you consider what I'm saying here, you can kind of see why he had the expansiveness of frequency signatures throughout his soundscapes. And the more you dive into them and allow yourself to explore the kind of the stories he was telling through his sound, the more you'll understand how he was able to recreate that. So he is a storyteller through his soundscapes, and as you learn how to let go into these journeys, the more you're going to appreciate how he came to do what he did. He learned how to take you on a journey through the inner and outer realms through these musical compositions. One of the phrases we used over the years was, we are building the frequency maps to the higher realms, or the multidimensional realms of light, or the many-dimensional realms. However your understanding is of all of this now, there's lots of great teachers out there sharing this knowledge that will help you understand how Gary's particular mission was a part of that, and how it can continue to help you understand the knowledge you're learning and translate that into how you work with these soundscapes. Now in the 70s, so let's say Gary started, he was born in 55, he started playing it in the 60s. By the time the 70s came around, he had a lot of training. Nobody really understood what he was doing because this wasn't let's say, normal music composed the way it was supposed to be composed. And of course his family didn't understand it, so there was no support for him to do it, but he just did it because he knew that's what he had to do. And he wasn't trying to, come out and be be at recitals or, he did this for himself. This was his survival. Gary was not always in body. Body was difficult for him. He could ground his energy. He had interesting aspects of him that he could go in a lot of different directions, but his preferred choice was not always to be in body, but to be more connected to these multidimensional realms where he felt more of the truth was hidden. So in the 70s, when synthesizers and computers started rising up, and of course after a decade of getting this clairaudience training, the world really opened up for him, because now the sounds that he was hearing from these other realms, he could now start creating and recreating using the technology. So this is when technology really came in, and he worked with it intensely in the beginning. So he worked with all the initial beginning synthesizers, and luckily in the area that he grew up in was St. Petersburg, Florida. There was a gathering place called Vaco Sounds, and many of the, even now, top keyboard synthesists trained there, and they all came together, and I imagine it was just a great meeting of the minds. And he finally started finding his tribe more at that time. So in his early teenage years, he finally found people he could speak to about what he had been doing. And and not all of them were, of course, into the depth and the level that he was, and many of them were going in the commercial realm of pop music, or most of it was progressive rock music, which was his early genre that he got involved in because it made sense. That's a genre of music that is very storytelling, like the lyrics are very storytelling. They take you through a lot of different shifts and changes in the music, which you will experience with Gary's music. And there's a flow to that music that is unique to progressive rock. And it never quite made it to, the big pop charts, although several artists did. So one in particular that was Gary's favorite was Peter Gabriel, his early group Genesis with Phil Collins and I forget some of the other guys' name, but Tony Banks, I think. They're all fairly well known in that genre, and they did move on into the commercial realms, which Gary never did. So that was a big magical time for him, and perfect timing really to start learning how to become a sound designer, which was I guess it was probably a career before that, like Foley's and movies and things like that. But for him, he was able to really spend time with the technology and tune into the higher realms and just really nail these sounds down as he was communicating with the higher realms. And then he was able to bring those sounds into his recordings, which he could now do because the computer technology and the ability for him to start recording what he was doing was now available to him. Albeit the early days, and it wasn't as easy as it is now for sure, but he definitely progressed through all the years, and that was one of our biggest expenses over the years, was primarily keeping him up with the technology so that he could keep doing things as fast as he was getting them through his consciousness. So he was always buying the newest things as we could. And there were many sound designers that started coming up that were also creating some of the unique sounds that he could work with. And he may tweak them or work with them, and some sound designers, he really liked their work, and so he could use them as is. But in the initial days, he had to create all of his own sounds because there really weren't banks of sounds available at that time. Not that there weren't sounds available, they just weren't the right kinds of sounds that he needed for his particular work. So this kind of may be getting you to realize why we call this music transmissions instead of just music. These are things that Gary receives through his intention. So the key is intention, of course. having the skill is another factor, because you can't just bring through if you don't have the skill development to work with the technology. So in the higher realms, these technologies and things aren't needed, but here on this third dimensional plane they were. So that, his initial years was spent learning the technology, becoming one with the technology, while he was simultaneously becoming one with the higher realms of teachers and guides and other masters, sound masters that he had played with in many other lives, which we will talk about later on, about the different lives that we have both gone through together, as well as Gary. So he definitely connects with a group of teachers, guides, masters, people and beings who this is their thing, to bring through music. And music, as many of you know, all of you should know, is that it's the highest form of communication that we can use to bridge between our three-dimensional brains, our analytical parts, our logical parts, and connect with these higher realms and actually start to learn how to receive information through frequency, through sound, through vibration, through modulation, through rhythms and patterns. And so this is where Gary started to continue to develop himself and his work. Many of the compositions we have are done in real time, and especially in the early days, because he didn't always have the ability to record and then go back over something. So in some of the earlier soundscapes, they were definitely all real-time transmissions, which to me was really which really, I don't want to say sold me, but really showed me his gift, because to be able to sit down and bring some of these layers through and these different levels of information in a real-time situation without being able to go back through and do any editing really started to show me how much of a channel he was for this information to come through him, and through his knowledge that he developed and his academics that he developed, and working with the technology and setting the intention for whatever the composition was he was creating to come through in that way was just, it blew my mind. Now, as technology continued and he was able to lay down tracks and put layers on things, then he started doing a lot of work that way. And as I go through the different soundscapes, I will definitely share with you how he did what he did with the different soundscapes, and the ones that were channeled completely, no tracks or no layers afterwards, and others that were really worked out. And he loved both methods. Now, while he was creating the layered effect, he was bringing things through in real time. He would spend hours, days, or weeks on a section of the album, just being in channel mode, just bringing it through until it locked. He would know when it was done, when it was ready. It was like, cooking. It was like, when is this recipe going to be finally done? And he would just know it. There would be a frustrating period of time, like, oh man, I can't get this. I know I'm hearing something, I'm getting some information, but I can't bring it through. And he would just have to sit in it. And, for me living in the household with him, I don't want to say I got tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, mostly because I knew what he was doing and I appreciated that dedication to what he was doing. But yeah, certainly after a while, especially if something had a beat in it and the beat was continuous, like throughout the day and however long he would be playing. So that was always fun for me, and we would kid about that. Like he said, "Are you bored yet? Are you tired of hearing this this section?" And the section could maybe be less than a minute long. But yet he would have to, just be with it and stay in that space. So I think with this understanding, if you think about this music in this way and how it was created, it will help you to understand the deeper implications of what Gary was bringing through. And perhaps also expand your understanding of what's happening inside you. So bringing it through was very different than experiencing it or listening to it. So I'm the first one who would listen to things after a piece was done. And it was a very different experience for me as a listener than it was for Gary as the one bringing it through. Not that he couldn't appreciate it totally afterwards, because he did, because he knew that while he was bringing it through, he was in this altered state of awareness, and he didn't always know what was going on. Like some of the channelers who you hear speak, they say they don't necessarily know what's being said when it's being said. And this is how it would happen for Gary, both ways. Sometimes he was, completely aware and working on certain logistics of the process, but much of the time, he was definitely in a very expansive, altered state and didn't know what was coming through. So when things were finally, album was finally completed, he was as amazed as anybody else just hearing it. So it was a divine blessing for him as well when it was finally done, to be able to actually work, quote, work with the music. Please continue on to the second part of this intro to our Get Started Here series. In part 2, I'll talk more about how we met in the twin flame connection, along with our mission work that evolved from our relationship. I'll also start to share how Gary got started on the DNA activation work using his sounds and music.